Greetings, everyone, and welcome to SpaceWeek Live, episode 113 on this Sunday, March 20th, 2022. As always, SpaceWeek is a live Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Just make sure to tag my name at rawspace so that we see those questions. All right. So, welcome, and let's take a look at the last week. On Tuesday, let me switch my, there we go. On Tuesday, U.S. spacewalk number 79 with Kayla Barron and Raja Chari took place. Wait a minute. Tuesday. There we go. There's the spacewalk. To install a mounting bracket for the new IROSA solar array that will be installed on the space station's 3A power channel in May. The next pair of IROSA solar arrays, the next two arrays, will be delivered by a cargo dragon in May and should be installed within about a month of their arrival. This is played at 2 times speed, which is why it looks a little frenetic, but it was a pretty sweet view they had, dangling 240 miles over some ocean there. At the same time, actually, while this spacewalk was going on, Astra returned to flight after barely over a month since their incident in February where they lost their rocket and their payload due to a timing glitch in their payload fairing jettisoning mechanism. There are a series of mechanisms that release the payload fairing, and at that time they did not fire in the correct order, which prevented the final mechanism from receiving the signal to activate, which resulted in the payload fairing not opening, and the second stage was released, but it was trapped inside the fairing, and so when the upper stage engine ignited, it blasted apart the fairing and sent the upper stage tumbling off into oblivion. So a return to flight after a mishap like that usually takes some number of months, but Astra was very confident they understood the problem, and it was a wiring issue basically, and they fixed it in their next rocket and had a successful launch on 15 March. So let's check that out.
15. 10, water on. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
First motion.
First. Vehicle has cleared the tower.
LV0009, it's on its way to space. Our next objective is Max Q in just under a minute.
Gorgeous liftoff views from Kodiak, Alaska. T plus 25 seconds, looking good. T plus 45, still looking good. You can see the vehicle pitching downrange south from Kodiak, Alaska towards orbit. And there you got an onboard view on the first stage looking down.
There we go. I had the wrong audio source selected, so it wasn't quieting down when I spoke. So they had a great launch. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, there was some ambiguity at the end of the broadcast because at the time they ended the broadcast, they did not yet have confirmation. They knew that the second stage cutoff, the SECO, was successful, but they did not have confirmation that the payload was deployed. And they actually ended their broadcast before they had that confirmation, which had everybody worried that maybe something had gone wrong with the deployment. But later on a short time later on Twitter, they did announce that the payload deployment was successful and that the mission was a complete success. They just maybe had a telemetry issue or a communications issue, which prevented them from getting the timely notification of that payload deployment success. So congratulations to Astra. This is their first successful customer payload deployment. That's excellent. On Thursday, the Artemis I SLS rocket began rolling out to Launch Complex 39B at the blistering pace of less than 1 mile per hour. This is actually sped up to 2 times speed. On top of the crawler transporter. Now, NASA has 2 crawler transporters, or as I call them, crawlers. These are relics of the, look at those engines. These are relics of the Apollo program, and they were used for Apollo, Saturn V, the Space Shuttle, and now SLS. And the whole journey, the 4-mile journey from the vehicle assembly building to LC-39B took about 10 hours, but it did arrive successfully, and now the largest production rocket to sit on a launch pad is now erected at Kennedy Space Center for the first time since Skylab, since the Saturn V launched Skylab back in the 70s. So pretty exciting stuff. Then on also on 17 March, actually this was that same day, Thursday, a Chinese Long March 4C launched the, let's see, this is the Yaogan 3402 payload from Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in the Gobi Desert of northwest China. Let's check out the launch. then on Friday, Russian cosmonauts Oleg Artemyev, Denis Matveev, and Sergei Korsakov launched on Soyuz MS-21 from Baikonur Cosmodrome on a fast-track trip to the ISS. Let's check out the launch and then we'll go on from there. Audio getting a little matrixy there, but successful launch as is usual for this vehicle. And about 3 hours later, they arrived at the space station. And here we have some slightly sped up video of their approach.
Fly around has started. We confirm.
And the fly around has now began at a range of less than 400 meters.
100 meters is the range, and 1 meter, 0.5 meters per second is the closing rate.
The fly around of the station will last a few minutes, resulting in station keeping for a brief period of time, which enables Russian flight control to assess the vehicle's systems before they reinitiate the spacecraft's approach.
And then the hatch opening, which held a bit of a surprise. So the ISS crew, Americans and Russians alike, were waiting for the new crew members. And then when they came through, they were wearing these bright yellow flight suits with blue highlights, which is not the normal color. I don't think I've ever seen this color of a flight suit before, but particularly poignant, I guess, or coincidental, or whatever. There's much discussion of this. Is that these are Russian cosmonauts, right? On behalf of Roscosmos, which is led by Dmitry Rogozin, who's been very vocal about political matters involving his country and the current conflict in Ukraine. But yellow and blue happen to be the colors of the Ukrainian flag. So when they came through the hatch, everybody was like, what? And there was speculation as to, was this some sort of sign of solidarity with the people of Ukraine? And my theory was that they wouldn't dare do any such thing. The cosmonauts themselves say there was simply an excess of yellow fabric, which is an interesting thing to say. Roscosmos has stated that there was no connection at all between the color of the uniforms and the current political situation, but it was an interesting thing to witness in any case. But yeah, you draw your own conclusions, I guess. Then, late that night, SpaceX launched another batch of 53 Starlink satellites from Cape Canaveral. An interesting aspect of this launch coverage was that I don't know if they forgot to flip a switch or what, but there was no countdown on the live stream. I just noticed that a few minutes ago when I queued this up for replay. I didn't even notice that part during the live stream because it was late at night and I was tired. But yeah, there was no countdown. It was just pad audio. So this marked a milestone 12th launch for this SpaceX booster, a new record for them. And we had some good video of the booster landing approach.
And there you can see on your left-hand screen that landing burn has begun. So let's see if we can land the first stage for a 12th time.
Unfortunately, that footage froze up and cut out at the last minute, or at the last second. But the landing was successful, as was the payload deployment of those Starlink satellites. We had a few seconds of the video, or rather a few seconds of video of the satellite deployment, but that cut out too. And there was the rocket on the drone ship. And the issue with the video is just another reminder that live video feeds from remote locations in the middle of the ocean or up in space are not easy. And they're not a given. So with or without video, the mission was a complete success. So congratulations to SpaceX for their 12th reuse of an orbital booster. So that's it for events of the last week. Now, taking a look further back into space history, this Wednesday, March 23rd, will mark the 21st anniversary of the deorbiting of the Russian Mir space station, which you see here. Mir orbited from 1986 to 2001, when funding ended for the program. It was deorbited over the Pacific. These video clips are from Fiji, I believe. So it began its orbital re-entry over Fiji, and then it splashed down in the South Pacific. So when Mir deorbited, the ISS was in its infancy. It had been, the first ISS component was launched in, I think it was 98, wasn't it? And so the ISS was just beginning its life when Mir came down. So looking ahead to this week, we actually don't have any launches on the schedule, but we do have a live stream. On Wednesday, March 23rd at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, 11:40 UTC, or GMT, whatever your preference, is U.S. spacewalk number 80. This time they'll be replacing radiator beam valve module hoses, amongst other upgrades. As with all ISS spacewalks, it will last about 6.5 hours from the time that they begin, which for the U.S. spacewalks means when they switch their suits to internal power at about 8:50 a.m. Eastern. And that's actually the only scheduled event in this coming week. There were a couple of launches that were delayed, but I'll talk about them next week. So I'd like to take a moment to thank our channel members and supporters who cast their vote for this sort of content. And if you wish to become a member, just click the join button on YouTube, and there you'll have your different tiers of membership to choose from. Also, I wanted to mention that SpaceWeek is now, and has been for a couple of months now, once again available as an audio podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, a bunch of different podcast providers. So if you're interested in listening in your car or on the go, check it out. Just search for SpaceWeek by Raw Space. And let's see, I think I have a command for that too, podcast. Put the link in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, Nightbot's being slow. All right, let me get to your questions. And I know I saw a few in there. So if you want to go to if you want to just manually type in the URL for the podcast, it is spaceweek.libsyn.com. That's spaceweek.libsyn.com. And that'll take you to the episode list. It was, I offered it as a podcast a couple years ago, but then that I ended that for a while and I resumed it again back in January. I just keep forgetting to mention it during during Space Week, so there you go. Let me get to your questions. All right. Rockin' Robbins 13. Any new info from Astra? It was great to see them succeed so soon after a malfunction. So we have the reason for the malfunction. That was the timing of the payload fairing release mechanisms, which was due to faulty wiring. It wasn't a software issue, it was a hardware wiring issue. As far as new info, I don't have any additional info beyond that their payload deployment was successful for this latest launch. Anton Nim says, thank you for the coverage. I missed this spacewalk. You know what? I actually missed a spacewalk. It was number 78 that I missed back in, I don't know, October, November time frame. Like it was scheduled, I think it was postponed, and then I missed it. I didn't catch it on the schedule, didn't notice it, and so I totally flubbed that one. But 80, I'm not gonna miss. All right, TIG. That chain tether screw up was really getting sketchy at the end of the walk. Yeah, that was unusual. So at the very end of the spacewalk this past week, I believe it was one of the, I don't think it was a RET, a retractable equipment tether. I think it was the and I don't remember the acronym for the actual astronaut tether that tethers them to the space station so they can't float away. Anyway, it wouldn't retract. Like they're supposed to retract so that they don't just dangle all over the place, but the thing wouldn't retract, and it was, they were having to coil it up and hold it, and it was a big mess. But they eventually got it themselves with this coiled up tether stuffed back in the airlock, and they got in okay. But they had a bit of a challenge with that, and that was unusual. Normally the tethers don't malfunction like that. Real Sven Animated says, why is your camera sometimes 30 FPS? I always ask myself. So my camera, so I always stream at 30 FPS, not 29.97 or 24 or 60. I stream at 30 FPS. And my camera, my webcam, should be coming through at 30 FPS as well. So any stream you watch on my channel is going to be 30 FPS. There's no reason for me to go higher because virtually none of the source material that I would be showing, rocket launches and whatnot, are broadcast in any higher than 30 FPS. So there's no point in going higher. Plus it chews up bandwidth, and I try to, especially doing 4K, I try to conserve bandwidth as best I can. TIG again, wonder if they had a beacon on it. I wonder if they could salvage it from the ocean. A beacon on what? I'm not sure which launch or object you're referring to, but Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a re-entry, then I mean anything that is not specifically designed for re-entry is going to be unusable. It's going to be either, you know, charred beyond recognition or completely disintegrated or just in scraps. Only a capsule or a craft that's specifically designed for orbital re-entry can survive that. Not applicable says, anyone notice how speed display wasn't working? Yeah, there were some issues with some of the telemetry on a couple of the streams this past week. There's no, you know, now the telemetry that gets displayed during live broadcasts is not for display purposes only. That's not production telemetry values that the mission controllers are going to be seeing on their screens. So, you know, maybe there was a disconnect between the official, you know, whatever, the system reading the telemetry and the broadcast apparatus, whatever. But you know, if there's a mix-up in the telemetry on the screen, rest assured that the mission controllers have the real values at their disposal. Let's see. Anton Nim says, Astra seems to run lean. They have done so much with so little, really. And that's kind of the way of the new space companies, is that they accomplish quite a bit with limited resources through, you know, innovation and leveraging existing knowledge, you know, because there's a lot out there. Raw Space Addict. What was that slapping or clicking at the Astra liftoff? Very strange. So if you want, you can go back and rewatch it. But I do recall that during the Astra liftoff, there was a rhythmic noise as the rocket was ascending. I'm assuming that that was a camera on a timer taking photos, because I mean, you heard that holler when it launched. You know, that video was being taken from a media viewing area, so I think that you were just hearing a camera clicking. Mark Desert, I sort of remember when Skylab came down. Yeah, that was a little before my time, but it's unfortunate that didn't last as long as it was intended to. And it was a cavernous space compared with modern space stations, because it was reusing, like they used the Saturn V upper stage as a space station. So it was a very large open bay that we just don't have that kind of, you know, volume available to us in space anymore. Tomas Borbeli, why has Chinese launches always falling parts? So the white rectangular objects that you see falling off of Chinese rockets when they launch are foam. They're like insulation panels. They're not ice. They're like either foam or some other sort of insulation. They're designed to fall off. They wrap their rockets in insulation so that to protect them from the elements and from the temperature of the atmosphere. And that's what those are. They're just designed to fall off, and they don't affect the performance of the flight at all. But it's definitely not ice. Like you've seen, you know, footage of Saturn V and other rockets with large chunks of ice falling off. That's not what those are. They're not frozen. Because actually a lot of Chinese launches, I think most Chinese launches use hypergolic fuels, which produces that orange smoke, the nitrogen tetroxide, and the unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine or other hydrazine variants, UDMH for short. And hypergolics aren't stored at cryogenic temperatures, so they wouldn't generate ice condensation and ice anyway, but they do need to be temperature controlled. All right. Antonym, I do remember when Skylab came down. A friend of mine was an aerospace engineer, and he had a chance to work on Skylab or the DC-10. I told him he was doomed either way. McDonnell Douglas DC-10, that is. Rockin' Robbins 13, I thought it was interesting that the Russians put us on Santa's naughty list, but still maintained their English translation. So NASA and Roscosmos have continued, their partnership has continued functioning more or less normally. Now, the Russian statement that they would no longer provide rocket engines to the U.S. affects Northrop Grumman with their Antares rocket and ULA with their Atlas V rocket, but that's about it. And really, ULA is all set because they have enough engines stockpiled, enough RD-180 engines stockpiled for another 24 launches, which is a lot of launches. That's years worth. So, you know, the only real potential impact would be Northrop Grumman if they don't have a sufficient supply of RD-181 engines. But, you know, but that's not NASA. That's Northrop Grumman and ULA. So Roscosmos and NASA, there have been question marks, there's been speculation, there's been concern, but their partnership has been continuing as always. You know, with the cosmonauts coming up. And I didn't mention this during the segment on the cosmonaut launch, but while this was in fact the first time, and I have mentioned this I think twice previously in SpaceWeeks, but while this was in fact the first time that 3 cosmonauts and no foreigners were launched to the space station, that has nothing to do with the current political situation between Russia and Ukraine. That's just it has more to do with Crew Dragon, honestly, because last May 2021, these 3 cosmonauts were chosen for this flight, and NASA opted not to buy a seat on the flight because they had sufficient seats on Crew Dragon. They didn't need to send anybody up on a Soyuz, which after all is quite a bit more expensive. Yeah, so there you go. Let's see. Antonym, the landing video nearly always cuts on the barge because it shakes the antenna sending the feed. That is true. And you know, Elon Musk is aware of, he's media savvy. He's sort of lovably awkward, as everybody knows, but he's a media savvy guy. And, you know, it's kind of surprising in one aspect that they wouldn't have come up with a solution for the cutting out of the video during booster landings, you know, like by moving their transmitter to off the barge or something like that, but or a drone or something. But the fact is that the video's real purpose is for engineering and, you know, internal quality assurance purposes, and the fact that we get to see it live on the broadcast is really just gravy. So, you know, and even if the live video doesn't transmit, they still have the video from the rocket itself, you know, that they like download on a USB stick or whatever their interface is. So, yeah, so it's really no skin off their nose, but it would be nice to have more, you know, landing videos that didn't cut out. Mark Desire. The space shuttle was supposed to bring some kind of booster unit up to Skylab, but the shuttle program got delayed and wasn't ready to save Skylab in time. Yeah, and then the first shuttle launch wasn't until, what was it, 1980 or 81? I forget. I love Jeff Bezos. Where can I get a Saturn V model in natural size? You mean 1-to-1 scale? Well, you could go to Kennedy Space Center, or you could go to Johnson Space Center, or you could go to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Those are the 3 locations where there is an actual Saturn V on display. There are 3 remaining, and they are in those 3 locations, and I've seen 2 of the 3. I haven't been to Houston. But we have an Oompa Loompa peeking around the corner here. All right. Cody Rothko says they have flown with those spacesuits before, meaning the yellow ones, in like 2014. Okay, I just hadn't remembered seeing that. Also, this flight was honoring Sergei Korolev, who was born in Ukraine. Sorry I'm so far behind. The timing just happened to be coincidence. So, you know, as with many things, like the 3 cosmonauts on the Soyuz, there are a lot of coincidences that happen, and they don't necessarily mean that there's any big dramatic, you know, choice going on behind the scenes. But the color was definitely bold, for one thing, and interesting timing with the situation in Ukraine. All right. Any more questions? Okay, looks like that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you all for joining today. Make sure to like, subscribe, and activate notifications if you haven't already. Keep it raw, and I will catch you in the next live stream, which should be the spacewalk on Wednesday. Until then, take care.